If you are a Royals fan that needs to be talked off the ledge, well, this episode may be for you.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And as you know by now, you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. If you want to know a little bit more about me, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some hosting, some co-hosting, and some producing as well. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you are going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, regardless if they get their ass kicked like they did tonight, or they find a way to win in dramatic fashion as they did last Friday against the Seattle Mariners. But before we dive into our segments tonight, want to let you know about our title sponsor today in eBay Motors. If you're worried about having the right part, you don't know what part you may be looking for, well, head over to eBay Motors because they're going to have you covered every single time. They are a great, great group to use. And we are always very proud to have them as a sponsor on many of our episodes, as we have throughout this entire season. But we'll have more on them coming up a little bit later on in the show tonight. Well, this is a later episode, but I think it's going to be worth your time here. I just returned from Kauffman Stadium. It is the fourth consecutive loss for the Kansas City Royals, and like some of their games of late, game was over pretty early. And even with that dramatic come-from-behind victory on Friday against Seattle, this recipe has not really been a successful one. The Royals come to bat in the bottom of the first, and they've been trailing now for 7 straight games. Not since last Monday against Cleveland in Game 1 did a starter have a clean inning at the top of the first. And tonight was the second worst in this bad stretch behind Daniel Lynch. The last spot in this rotation, last time this spot was up, was the worst one that the Royals had. 7 runs in the first inning. Tonight it was 6 runs. Dan Altavilla was the opener, and then it was Daniel Lynch, and it just never was that good. But I'm not going to sit here and recap tonight's game. I'm not going to talk about Stanton's 450-foot home run. I'm not going to talk about Gleyber Torres or Jose Trevino seemingly being the Royal killer in this series. No, tonight is going to be for the fan out there that is disappointed, maybe feeling negative, but doesn't want to give up just yet. Because I'll be quite honest with you, for those that follow me out there, for those that listen to this podcast and you respond to my tweets or respond to the comments in YouTube and say you're done watching and you're taking a break or this team's terrible, they've always been bad. Look, I'm not going to put up much of a fight because if you don't believe in the team, if you're done watching, I will try my best to convince you with these episodes, with these segments. But I've also seen those comments going back to April 5th, April 6th. You know, this season it's been very much game by game of people being very emotional. For the first time this year, the Royals are really in a rough stretch, and they are getting pounded on by a team that is going to be the number 1 seed in the American League, in my opinion. Not to make an excuse on that, because you shouldn't just look at every good team and say, well, they're really good, that's why we lost. Well, if you believe you're good and you're a playoff team, you should be able to compete better than you have in this series. However, this is baseball. And if this is your first season buying into baseball, or maybe it's been a while, it happens. Going into this series, I didn't really like the pitching matchups. I didn't tweet out on Monday, but I was about to, and take that for what it is. But I was going to say this really feels like the game they got to grab because I didn't feel confident at all in the other 3. Mainly because Brady Singer is a bad matchup against the Yankees. So we saw tonight how bad of a matchup Daniel Lynch and Dan Altavilla were for that Yankees lineup. But the reality is, everybody is a bad matchup for the New York Yankees. It's not a team that you can go out there and dominate. And yeah, I'm not trying to advocate for making excuses. The Royals are getting bashed in right now, and they have one last opportunity to avoid their first sweep of the year. But let us not act like New York is a wild card team. Let's not act like they are one of the teams chasing Kansas City. They are the best team in baseball right now. And the best team in baseball by a pretty good margin. I know the Phillies are close to them in the win-loss column. Man, I would take New York against just about anybody right now. The way that rotation is throwing, the bullpen looks in that lineup. A guy that won a batting title was hitting ninth for the Yankees tonight. And the Royals did not counter with their best of the bunch to the first 5, 6, 7 innings of this game. But as I mentioned in the intro tonight, this episode is for the fans that are feeling down but want to feel better about things moving forward. I put this out on Twitter tonight, and again, you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. In the end, if we are purely talking about getting into the playoffs, which for a lot of fans out there, that is the goal. For some fans, it's winning the division. For some really optimistic fans, it's winning a series in the playoffs. For some out-of-this-world optimistic fans, you think getting to the World Series is going to be the satisfying thing. And, of course, if you make it to the playoffs, that's the goal. You don't go in there saying, that's good, lose all of them. And maybe I phrased my tweet a little poorly, but where I am at with this season is get into the playoffs and see what happens. Roll the dice, because that's 6 months of fun baseball, which is something I know I have been begging for the better part of half a decade. I mean, to look at some of these teams at the deadline and be buyers and have fun with packed crowds late in the season, walk-offs, just memorable moments. Been longing for that forever. And if that meant just getting into the playoffs and losing, getting swept in the wild card series, I can live with it because of where this team was a year ago. And this year, I've seen argument. I didn't think I was going to see more negativity this year than last year, but I've seen a lot of negativity because there's expectation now. Last year's team loses to the Yankees 11-5. Nobody bats an eye. You probably were checked out after the first inning. I wouldn't blame you one bit. But people expect more from this team. And in baseball, the unfortunate reality is you're going to have a 4-game losing streak. You're going to have probably multiple 4-game losing streaks. You're going to have a 5 or a 6-gamer, sometimes a 7-gamer. But it's always going to even itself out if you are a playoff team, if you are good enough, fortunate enough to make it into the postseason. And I do believe that this team is a playoff team. I am convinced of that at this point in time, even with this ugly stretch of play, because they've got a much softer schedule coming up after Sunday. And folks, that's even if they lose all of these games. I am just not going to go doomsday mode or not buy into this team, probably not this entire year, because I think they're going to be hovering around a playoff spot, holding one, chasing one within 3 games, or holding a spot by 3 games when it's all said and done. But to me, I think my stance has been, I'm not do or die for the division. I'm not do or die for how they match up with the Yankees, because in the end, it's not going to matter how they stack up with the Yankees when it comes to just making it into the playoffs, right? Here is the reality of it. If the Royals make the playoffs, they wouldn't see the Yankees until the second round anyway. Okay, unless Baltimore catches fire, New York gets really cold. That can always happen with injuries. And like I said, it's baseball. But, I had somebody reach out to me on Twitter and say, they should be sellers at the deadline. They should build for the future, because why does it matter if they're just going to get smoked by the Yankees in the playoffs? My stance was, if they make it to the playoffs and get smoked by the best team in the American League, so be it. So be it. Okay, that's just my expectation for the team. If they get in, you're rolling the dice, all right? You are rolling the dice. You're not worried about what happened back in June. Now, the 2014 Royals we can all go back to the regular season. How many times do you remember looking at it and saying, well, they don't match up with the A's that well. I don't like, a series against them or a wild card game against them, or I don't think they can compete with the Angels. The reality is you don't really know until that playoff series because everything's different. Everything is completely different when you get to October. And for me, that's the goal right now. So it's not about how do they stack up against the Yankees or how they stack up against the Orioles, how they stack up against the Twins or Cleveland for that matter. When we are just talking getting into the playoffs, it matters how they stack up against every team on the outside looking in. And if the Royals are better than those teams and they can prove over the course of the next 2 to 3 months they are better than them, they are going to make it into the playoffs. And whether it's the 6th seed or the 7th seed, I think those are really the only two options outside of winning the division, because I don't think they're going to catch Baltimore or the Yankees, whoever finishes second in the AL East. If it's just getting in, you need to worry about Boston. You need to worry about Detroit. You need to worry about Toronto, Texas, Tampa, Houston. All teams that are 500 right now or below. And they'll see Boston right before the All-Star break. They've taken both their series against Toronto. They've taken the series on the road against Tampa. They'll see them at the beginning of July. Detroit, they swept. Detroit's under 500, lost tonight. So if you believe the Royals are better than those teams, because I see all these tweets, well, they can't beat good teams. One, stop using the measurement of records against 500 teams are better because the Royals had a lot of wins against over 500 teams last week because those teams were over 500. Now they're 500 again. It's flip-flops back and forth. Don't use that measurement. It's a dumb way to measure wins against teams above 500 or not. They got smoked by the Yankees. They've continued to get smoked by the Yankees, and maybe they can find a way to win the finale. But again, I don't think this season is completely relying on how they stack up against the best team in the American League. If your hope is World Series, yeah, they got to be better than the Yankees for a series in October. But let's worry about that when we get there. Okay, we'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, the good, the bad, and the ugly of this current stretch. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to a couple of the sponsors today, starting with one of our newer sponsors in Tax Network USA. Here on Locked On Royals, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon, and you can see that episode description below in our video. We also want to let you know about PrizePicks, and with PrizePicks, you could turn $10 into 1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer, and you can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chance of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. You can get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. So here's what you need to do. Go and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. As I mentioned tonight, I was out at Kauffman Stadium, had a chance to to get this game in, had a chance to go down to the clubhouse afterward. And again, I'm not going to recap tonight's loss. They got their butts kicked in this one, 11-5. Very similar to last night's game. Big deficit early, couldn't really mount a comeback, and here they are, trying to avoid a sweep for the first time this season. Alec Marsh will go tomorrow, and this gauntlet, as we had an episode titled The Gauntlet a couple weeks back, right before that Minnesota series, it's got 4 games to go. 1 against New York, 3 against the Dodgers, and then the Royals will see a lot of teams under 500 and a lot of last place teams where hopefully they can right the ship and feel much better going into the All-Star break. I did want to kind of wrap this up, though, with the gauntlet and saying what the good has been, what the bad has been, and what the ugly has been. The good, I think, is pretty obvious. It's Bobby Witt Jr. being Bobby Witt Jr., being an MVP candidate, being able to, take this pressure and even in losses, look like a superstar every single time he takes the field. And tonight, again, another multi-hit game. He drove in 2 runs, made a couple of great plays at shortstop. And this is when the game is completely out of hand. Now, some people can take that and say, well, he's playing well because the game's out of hand. Well, just go back to Friday then. And when they needed him most, what he was able to accomplish at the plate. I mean, he is truly a superstar, and hopefully he'll be the starting shortstop in the All-Star break, or the All-Star game, in Arlington. Basically a homecoming for him, playing in the stadium right next door to where his dad played a number of years for the Texas Rangers. And so that one to me is very obvious. Alongside Cole Reagans. Cole Reagans and Bobby Witt Jr., I think 2 guys that, Royals fans put a lot of stock into coming into the year. They've been phenomenal. They have been absolutely just lighting it up every time they're out there. Reagans every 5th day, Bobby Witt Jr. every single day. Wasn't hard for me to pick who the good has been during this gauntlet of a stretch. The bad to me has been the bullpen. And maybe you would say, the ugliness would be the bullpen, right? But to me, I think the bullpen is just bad, mainly because they've had their moments of coming together and picking up a big-time win in relief for this Royals ball club. You've had some guys that have kind of surprised you, a Sam Long, if you will. Schreiber seems to be back on track a little bit. Angel Serpa, though he's had his ups and downs of late still, high velocity there. But there still is a lot of holes there. Will Smith, another one of the good parts about the bullpen right now, which I can't believe I'm saying that, and I didn't think I'd be saying that at any point this season. But maybe there's a case for him to close out a couple of games the next time the Royals have a lead and give them a different look compared to James McArthur. But to me, it's just the bad right now. Because the ugly to me was more so on display tonight. So the good, Bobby Witt Jr., Cole Reagans. The bad is the bullpen. The ugly to me is the depth on this team. And the depth more specifically in the rotation. I mean, I look at what Michael Wacha gave this team, and I think it was a very steady hand. And, he was starting to pick up steam a little bit. Saw him down in the clubhouse today. Didn't have a boot on. Nothing seemed to be bothering him. He was standing there, but there was no boot. It didn't look like his ankle was still swollen or his foot was still swollen. So maybe he's going to be back sometime soon. And I think the Royals would pray to the heavens for him to come back sometime soon, because mercy me, the depth for just one starter is not good. It is, and I quote, ugly. UGLY, ugly. Daniel Lynch in his last 2 outings here. So you go back to Friday, 7 runs in the first inning. He then gives up another run, and he gets 8 total over 4 innings, I believe it was. Tonight, Dan Altavilla wasn't great as the opener, but they had to use him in that spot because Daniel Lynch wasn't good enough last time out. Altavilla gives up 5 runs in the first, and 3 of those runs charged to him, or 2 of them, I think it was, came on a pitch that Daniel Lynch threw to Jose Trevino that was deposited over the bullpen in left field to make it 6-0. Daniel Lynch then kind of cruises a little bit, avoids some damage, but hell, it's 6-0. You are just supposed to be eating innings at that point. And then Giancarlo Stanton hits one to the highway, and then he gives up a 3-run bomb to Gleyber Torres. And in the postgame, I did think it was interesting. In the postgame, Daniel Lynch was kind of telling us, I agree or I respect any decision they make in terms of how they handle my spot in the rotation, but I believe I'm a starter. And I want to get to a spot where I don't need somebody to open for me. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I'm going to go back tonight and get the actual transcript so that I can get the right quote. But to me, it kind of showed hey, don't use an opener. Don't use an opener when I'm starting. I'm a good starter, and I believe that. And I think it's fine to have that confidence. It's also another thing to question the decision. And even if you say I respect the decision, felt weird, felt a little odd to me. But I want to make sure I get the exact quote right. So don't hold me to that right now. But you could tell a little bit of the frustration of how that outing went. And, it was only 3 runs at one point. Then it turned into 6 after that 3-run bomb by Gleyber Torres. But to me, I look at this rotation and really, except for Waka, they've had incredible health. But man, if one of them goes down again, we saw that with Martian getting hit with the forearm or hit on his forearm. I don't like the fact that the Royals' first course of action is to turn to Daniel Lynch as the number 6 starter, because I don't believe in Daniel Lynch being the number 6 starter. He might have some role out of the bullpen, but I would love for the Royals to have a better option at that point. And to me, that's the ugly part, because in these last 2 starts, the starter of the game, just the starter alone, has given up 13 runs. Altavilla and Lynch the last 2 times out. Michael Walker would have been a much better matchup in that game. I don't know if he'll make that next start in Oakland, because game 1 in Oakland will be this next turn in the rotation. But that, to me, is the ugly part. That, to me, has been the stain of just, it doesn't look that great when you get to that spot in the rotation. And it kind of takes the wind out of the sails when you're looking at a series of potential wins in that series. Didn't really feel like they had a chance at all to win today's game, and it proved to be right when it was all said and done. Okay, before our final segment, want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, there was a tweet put out there, or at least it came from John Heyman's podcast, that he considers the Royals to be one of the potential fits for Luis Robert of the Chicago White Sox. What do we think of it? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And find us on wherever you get your podcast. Want to let you know a little bit about our title sponsor today in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Also, want to give a shout out to one of our local sponsors here. We've love giving them the love they deserve in PXG Golf. I've told you about that personal fitting that I did for my long-range game in golf, the driver. It was so excellent, fun to use, TrackMan, the golf simulator, seeing the spin rate, seeing the distance, seeing the swing speed, and how it compares to an average golfer. Really fun stuff there. You'll either feel much better about your golf game, or if you're already great at golf, you get to see how great you actually are at golf. So they have really, really cool things out there. It's such a professional setup. The people over there are fantastic to work with. So I want to let you know a little bit more about them, because they made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City, 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. You can get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals, and the limit is 1 dozen golf balls per person. This promotion ends on June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply, but you can see their store for details. Well, before the game tonight, there was a post put out there on social media that stemmed from Jon Heyman, one of the big baseball reporters, and his podcast, going over Luis Robert being, of course, a big trade chip for the Chicago White Sox and the potential suitors. And I thought this post was a little bit misleading because naturally, when you hear suitors, you think those teams have made contact and that they are asking or working on a trade to acquire this said player. And Jon Heyman listed the Royals as one of the suitors, but then later clarified it's teams that he thinks are the best fits. And it's obvious why the Royals were in that, because they don't really have a great outfield, if you might have heard that. And the offensive production is lacking. Now, Luis Robert has been hurt basically for the entire season. He hasn't hit that well, though we all know last year in a full season, I got criticism for saying he's a superstar. Okay, if he's not a superstar, he's a star player. All right, he was a 5-WAR guy, nearly a 130 WRC plus hitter. I mean, a Gold Glover in the outfield. That's a game-changing center fielder. Here is where it's at, though, with the Royals. I don't know what some of the listeners out there are thinking a deadline is going to look like or what a trade's going to look like with the Royals. And, God, I hope I'm wrong. I hope the Royals have some great package to fleece the White Sox for Luis Robert. I'm just not holding my breath for it. Because the report was out there, maybe it's a smokescreen, maybe it's not, but it was earlier in the week or last week that the White Sox are searching for a package bigger than what Juan Soto got, what Washington got in return for trading Juan Soto to the Padres. That's what they're looking for with Luis Robert. Maybe that's setting the bar high so that it can only, kind of fall into the wheelhouse, if you will. If you are asking for a raise, you always start really high. And if they go, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this, well, that's kind of what I was expecting anyway, but at least I'm going to ask really high, because what's the worst they can say? It's no, right? So they could ask for multiple top 100s, a major league ready player, yada, yada, yada. Problem is for the Royals, I don't think the White Sox can even take a call from the Royals on that. A, because the Royals don't have many top 100 prospects. They have a system that is not top 5, not top 10, not top 15, not top 20. And that's who I think the White Sox are going to be looking for. They don't care about a bottom 5 farm system's number 1 guy. They would rather have the number 5 guy in the number 1 system and include him in the deal. B is, even with all the Royals' influence, I do not see the Chicago White Sox trading Luis Robert with the years of control he already has at 26 years old to a division rival in the Royals. I do not think they want to face Luis Robert in this division for a long time coming. And I get there are reasons of you can't just look at division teams, division rivals, and say, I'm not trading with them because I don't want to see our player play in their uniform. If it's a deal that makes sense for your team, you do it. And I just don't think a deal between the Royals and the White Sox would make sense. And I don't think a trade for Garrett Crochet is going to work either. I think they are going to go for some of those teams out there like a Baltimore who have a loaded system and ask for the moon. And even if they can't give them the moon, they can get half of that or 3/4 of that. They're going to go to teams with the top systems in baseball. The Royals are not one of them. And I also don't think the Royals are going to be willing to part ways with top 5 guys in their system because they're still trying to reload that system. I think they're going to go out and be aggressive and acquire talent, but a lot of that talent I think is going to be bullpen oriented. They could go after a corner outfield bat. I just don't see them getting the superstar or the star, if I irritate anybody there, and be able to afford it and for that team to pull the trigger on it. I just don't see it happening. I don't see the Royals being in the running for any of the top name starting pitchers. I don't see the Royals being in the market for Mason Miller. I think they're going to make a lot of trades between the lines that may not pop on the screen to you, but hopefully when you get to August and September, those moves make a lot of sense. Those moves were great for the team. I mean, they got Cole Riggins, who was a major league player for Aroldis Chapman last year. They don't really have an Aroldis Chapman. It's going to be the opposite, too. They're trading prospects this time for a everyday player or an everyday bullpen guy or a starting pitcher there for depth. They can use the number 6 starter. So those are all things I'm going to be looking out for. But if something changes, I will always let everybody know and give my thoughts and opinions on that. Just don't think the Royals are going to be in the cards for Luis Robert. Okay, well, that is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, tomorrow we're going to break down the finale between the Royals and the Yankees and preview that series against the Los Angeles Dodgers. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.